Hey, everybody, thanks so much for joining us here on 9 News Watch. I'm meteorologist Chris Bianchi, and we're going to take a look at the windy weather specifically. And yes, we have the chance for some snow tomorrow. I'll have more on that, and we'll have more on that 9 News at noon. And we'll also have 9 News at noon, if I could say that clearly. And also, I'll have more on that in detail tomorrow morning, just because in the near term, especially considering what happened last week, I think that there is understandably perhaps a bit more focus and a bit more concern than usual about stronger wind gusts. But I kind of want to probably calm things down a little bit. I've seen a fair bit of perhaps a little bit of concern out there on social media, and understandably so, about the winds today. But again, let's start things out by taking a look at in terms of those winds that we've seen so far. They've been pretty strong in a few spots. Up by Berthoud Pass, we've seen some gusts up to 91 miles an hour. Here in Denver and along the Front Range, nothing that gusty yet, though if you're joining us from Arvada, from Golden, from Boulder, you've probably noticed those winds start to kick up in the last hour or so. We're starting to gust up to about 40 miles an hour in the foothills, which isn't nothing, but obviously when we were talking about last week, we were talking about wind gusts in some of those really favored areas in excess of 100 and 110 miles an hour in a few localized spots. And right in the Front Range, we even did see in Boulder some gusts into the 90 to 100 mile an hour range. So again, 40 mile an hour wind gusts. Yes, those will pick up. Yes, we'll see some gusts that could be pretty strong out there, but it's not as strong as last week. So I kind of want to get into that. High wind warning does continue until 5 p.m. today. The strongest of the winds are going to be between about now and about 2, maybe 3 o'clock. So it's really going to be the next few hours where we see those really, really strong winds. Starting about noon, here's a look at some of those stronger winds. We're going to be, in some cases, gusting up to 70 to 80 miles an hour. And again, that is not nothing, but it's worth noting that when we're talking about miles per hour and the difference between a 75 mile an hour wind gust and a 100 mile an hour wind gust, the wind scale is exponential. And what I mean by that is the difference in terms of the sheer power of a 75 mile an hour wind gust versus a 100 mile an hour wind gust is several fold. So I want to emphasize the fact that we don't typically, it's not to necessarily put away a 75 mile an hour wind gust or look over it. It's the fact that a 100 mile an hour wind gust leads to considerably more issues and damage than a 70 to 75 mile an hour wind gust. And again, not to overlook that could lead to some localized power outages. I'll more on that in just a second. But again, a 75 mile an hour wind gust is very different from what we saw a week ago. So again, those winds will be strong. You'll notice them, especially for us in Evergreen, in Golden, in Boulder. You will notice those winds. There's no doubt about that. If you're driving up on Highway 40 over Berthoud Pass, it is going to be straight up nasty out there. Could see some blowing snow in a few spots. Far Eastern Plains, some blowing dust. But again, it is not last week. Let's kind of skip this ahead a little bit to 1 o'clock. And this is when those winds probably max out somewhere around 1, 2 o'clock. And again, going forward, we could see those winds in a few cases getting up to about 100 miles an hour for us. Not 100, about 80 miles an hour for us would be about our peak. In most foothill locations, again, there's a difference between 80 and 100 mile an hour wind gust. It is not nothing. It is different from last week. So that's the point I want to get across. Denver and kind of I-25 on east, those winds will be on the stronger side. But as I mentioned, those stronger winds, despite the fact the high wind warning goes until 5 o'clock tonight, those winds should max out over the next 3-ish hours or so. Next 2 to 3 hours will be the strongest of those winds. Then those winds do start to die back down, starting around 2, 3 o'clock, and really decelerating once we get to about 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon and this evening. So again, kind of want to emphasize the fact that, yes, those winds are strong. I know this is on a lot of people's minds considering last week, but there's one difference. One, the winds are not as strong as what we saw last week. Then there's number 2. There is a lot of snow on the ground right now. So there's no real fire danger today. Obviously, last week, we've been just so tinder dry here across the Front Range. Denver with less than 2 inches of total precipitation for the final 6 months of the year. That is unbelievable. That is straight up desert-like weather for us that we had here in Denver, and it continues. But taking a look at that snowpack statewide, and we have really just very, very good numbers across the state. And that does, of course, include us here in northeastern Colorado, where we've seen a lot of that snow here over the last week, and we'll be adding a bit to that tomorrow. So the snowpack on the ground adds moisture to it. It really just eliminates the chance for any sort of situation like we had a week ago. Now, unfortunately, this will be a story for another day. Unfortunately, the fire season, the fire danger threat is not gone. Once that snow melts and you say have 4 or 5 days after a snowfall for that snow to go away, unfortunately, that fire danger will come back again. Despite the fact that it's gotten colder, we did finally see some meaningful snow here in the Denver area. Again, unfortunately, there's not a lot of moisture within snow itself, so the fire threat for the winter and into the spring and the summer is not over yet. Hopefully, I say yet in the optimistic feeling or hope that we get some decent moisture come March, April, May. That tends to be our wetter time of year. But quick little meteorology 101, colder air can hold less moisture than warm air. And why does that matter? When you get snow, even when we get 6 inches, 7 inches, 8 inches of snow, like what we just had back over the weekend, we saw meaningful snow, and that was good. It mattered. But when that snow goes away, there's very little liquid in that. So we saw, generally speaking, about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch worth of moisture from that snowstorm back on New Year's. Again, we'll take every drop, we'll take every flake. If you're watching Mother Nature, we'll take it all. There's no doubt about that. The issue is that's not a ton of moisture, 1/4 to 1/2 inch of liquid. In a summer thunderstorm, you can get that in 5-10 minutes. We really rely on March, April, May to get our big kind of rain, our bigger precipitation events, an inch and a half rain event over the course of the day. That's when you start really cutting to drought and start really making a difference in terms of drought conditions. So the point right now is we're good for the moment. Today's windstorm, I wouldn't even call it a windstorm. Today's wind event, and it's not an insignificant one, A, is not as strong as last week's, but B, and more significantly, we have snow on the ground. So that's going to basically limit the fire danger to just about nil for most of us here in Colorado. Far eastern plains and far southeastern Colorado, where we just didn't see as much moisture, and also where most of that snow has melted, that's where you could see a little bit of blowing dust. Still, you saw some moisture out there as well, so the fire threat is very, very low throughout the state, and that does include the far eastern plains and southeastern Colorado. But again, for us here along the Front Range, it's not last week. Just want to reemphasize that for the millionth time. Now, the final thing I do want to kind of get across to you is the fact that, yes, we are going to be seeing some gusty winds. So there's a few things you can kind of do right now. And this could be maybe a good reminder to make sure that those Christmas ornaments or those holiday ornaments are brought inside here if you haven't done that already. I'll admit that I'm actually right now looking outside our window. I'm working from home this week, and I'm looking outside our window, and that's a good reminder to myself to take down those Christmas lights because, again, sometimes when you get some of these stronger winds, they can blow those things around. And we did pick up some ornaments, or I should say some toys for our dog from the lawn earlier on this morning and brought those inside because, again, we're going to be looking at some gusty winds, and that could lead to some of that getting blown about. And in some localized areas into the foothills, we could see some isolated power outages. I don't think that's going to be widespread and not nearly as damaging or as widespread as what we saw last week, but a few isolated, a couple hundred maybe power outages could be possible in the foothills today. And be careful on a high profile vehicle, and in particular, if heading up Highway 93, which tends to be so wind driven. That's of course the road, kind of the main link between Golden and Boulder. If you're not familiar with the area, you get out by Coal Creek Canyon, that area. Those winds there will be in the 70 to 80 mile an hour range. And that's where we could be, again, looking at the potential for high profile vehicles getting blown over. You're heading up Highway 40 through Berthoud Pass. You're heading even on up on I-70 past, say, Lookout Mountain. That's where you start getting into that area that could be seeing some of those really strong winds that could lead to high profile vehicles, if I can say that, being affected by that. So again, avoid those high profile vehicles for your day today, or avoid those areas that I mentioned in particular. Most of the metro area should be okay. I wouldn't think twice about driving a high profile vehicle for example, on I-25 in Denver or anything like that today. It would be, again, you get west into the foothills, and that's where you start running into some of those issues. So hopefully it's giving you a bit more. I want to emphasize the peace of mind considering what we saw last Thursday. And of course, we're still thinking about everybody who's been impacted by the horrific fires. And again, I know when I say that there's going to be some strong winds today, there's no doubt about it that may lead to some added nerves considering what we just saw 5 days ago. But there are two very, very different things ongoing right now. One, the winds aren't as strong. And as I mentioned, mile per hour winds, the difference between an 80 and a 100 mile an hour wind gust is exponential. It's a very, very big difference. It's not a 20 mile an hour difference, which seems insignificant. It is a significant difference. Not to downplay what we're seeing, but that's one big difference. And number two, of course, we got snow on the ground, which will limit, if not completely eliminate that fire threat for many of us. So I suppose good news passed along there. The other bit of good news, at least in terms of the ground and the moisture, is we're going to get more snow tomorrow, especially in northern Colorado. I will have more on that tomorrow morning. We'll have more on that 9news.com as well. Little fun fact, I'm going to write a story about that as soon as we finish up here. But in the meantime, again, thinking about all of you impacted by the fires, and thank you so much for joining us here on 9 News Watch for a detailed look at that wind forecast. I'm meteorologist Chris Bianchi, and have a great rest of your day.